In a land carved from dust and desperation, the line between survival and savagery was as thin as a whisper on the wind. The Arizona Territory of 1878 was no place for dreamers. It was a place of hard truths, where settlers clung to their patches of dirt, and the Apache fought for the remnants of their ancestral lands. This isn't a story of heroes and villains, but of the gray spaces in between. It's the story of Ilara Mae Thompson, a settler's daughter, with healing hands and a lonely heart, and Cain, a Chiricahua warrior with fire in his eyes and a bullet in his side. She risked everything: her family, her safety, her very place in the world for a man she was taught to hate. In return, he offered her the one thing no one else ever could, a promise of a life together, forged in a crucible of blood, betrayal, and impossible love. The sky over Redemption Creek had been the color of a fresh bruise for 3 days straight. When the rain finally came, it wasn't the gentle, life-giving shower the settlers prayed for. It was a biblical deluge, a furious assault of wind and water that turned the single dusty street into a river of mud and threatened to tear the shingles from every roof. Inside the Thompson homestead, a sturdy but plain cabin at the edge of the settlement, Ilara Mae Thompson worked by the flickering lamplight. At 19, she possessed a quiet intensity that set her apart. While other girls her age were concerned with church socials and the prospect of a good match, Ilara's world was one of herbs tinctures and the forbidden knowledge her mother had passed down before consumption had stolen her away. Her father, Jedediah Thompson, a man whose faith was as hard and unyielding as the land he tilled, called it folk nonsense. But he never refused the poultice she made for his aching back, or the willow bark tea for his fevers. More thunder. Jedediah grumbled, staring out the smeared window pane. He was a tall, gaunt man, his face a road map of hardships. The creek will rise. Might lose the lower fence. The fence can be mended, Pa Ilara said, her voice soft. She was grinding dried yarrow into a fine powder, the familiar, pungent scent filling the small room. It's not the fence, girl. It's the principle. This land gives nothing for free. You fight for every inch. He turned from the window, his gaze falling on her work. A familiar scowl tightened his lips. Still at it with the weeds. Your mother. She filled your head with too many stories. Ilara didn't rise to the bait. She knew his grief was a bottomless well, and his anger was just the bucket he used to draw it up. Her mother Sarah had been different. She saw the beauty in the harsh landscape, a symphony where Jedediah heard only a dirge. She had even spoken of the Apache not as demons, but as people who knew the secrets of the land. It was a heresy Jedediah had forbidden the moment her grave was filled. The storm raged, a relentless roar that swallowed all other sound. It was under the cover of this chaos that the universe decided to test Ilara Mae Thompson. A sudden frantic scratching at the back door, barely audible over the wind, made her freeze. It wasn't the sound of a stray dog. It was more desperate, more human. Stay put, Jedediah commanded, reaching for the heavy rifle he kept mounted over the hearth. His eyes, usually just tired, were now alight with suspicion. In this territory, an unexpected knock in a storm meant only one thing: trouble. He moved to the front of the cabin, peering through the window, assuming any threat would come from the town-facing side. Ilara's heart hammered against her ribs. The scratching came again, weaker this time, followed by a low moan that the wind almost carried away. It was a sound of pure agony. Acting on an instinct she didn't understand, she ignored her father's order. While he was distracted, she slipped a candle into a storm lantern, unlatched the back door, and peered into the maelstrom. He was slumped against the woodpile, half hidden by the overflowing rain barrel. At first, all she saw was a mess of soaked buckskin and long black hair plastered to a face clenched in pain. Then the lantern light caught the glint of a beaded armband, and her breath hitched. Apache. Panic seized her. Everything she had ever been taught screamed at her to slam the door bolted and scream for her father. The Apache were ghosts in the night, the faceless terror in campfire stories, the reason men like her father slept with a gun by their bed. Sheriff Brody Cain had just last week posted a fresh bounty for any warrior, dead or alive, after a supply wagon was supposedly raided near the San Pedro River. But then another moan, a sound stripped of all menace, of all threat. It was the sound of a creature in its last extremity. His head lolled to the side, and in the flickering light she saw his face properly for the first time. He was younger than she'd imagined. His features were strong, a proud aquiline nose, and a firm jaw, but his skin was ashen. A dark, ugly stain was spreading across his right side, soaking through the buckskin. It wasn't just rain, it was blood. Her father's voice boomed from inside. "Who's there? See anything, Alara?" Her mind raced. If her father found him, he'd shoot him without a second thought. If the sheriff found him, he'd drag him to the center of town and hang him as a spectacle. Every fiber of her settler upbringing screamed danger. But the healer in her, the part of her that was her mother's daughter, saw only a dying man. The stories her mother told her of people who understood the earth, who were a part of it, not just its conquerors, surfaced from the depths of her memory. In that moment, staring at the wounded warrior at her feet, she wasn't Jedediah Thompson's daughter. She was Sarah's. "It's nothing, Pa," she called back, her voice trembling but loud enough to carry. "Just a loose shutter, banging in the wind. I'll fix it." It was a lie. A terrible, monumental lie that would change the course of her life forever. Before the full weight of her decision could crush her, she grabbed the warrior's arm. He was surprisingly heavy, all lean muscle and bone. With a strength born of pure adrenaline, she half dragged, half carried him from the woodpile into the attached shed, where she kept her herbs and supplies. He was barely conscious, his breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. She lowered him onto a pile of old burlap sacks, his body slumping bonelessly. The storm raged outside, mirroring the tempest in her soul. She had just brought the enemy into her home. She had risked everything for a complete stranger, a man her world considered a monster. And as she looked down at his pain-racked face, she felt not a shred of regret, only a terrifying, all-consuming question. What have I done? The shed was Alara's sanctuary. It smelled of dried lavender sage and damp earth. Here, surrounded by the tools of her trade, she felt a flicker of control return. She barred the door from the inside and turned her full attention to the man on the floor. He was drifting in and out of consciousness. His breathing was a harsh, wet sound that spoke of deep injury. With trembling hands, she took her sharpest skinning knife and carefully cut away the blood-soaked buckskin shirt. The wound was worse than she'd feared. It was a ragged hole on his right side, just below the ribs. A gunshot wound crusted with dirt and blood. Infection was already setting in the skin around it, an angry, inflamed red. "Pa is heading to bed," she whispered more to herself than to him. "He won't check in here tonight. The storm is too loud." Working quickly, she fetched clean water and boiled it over a small shielded spirit lamp. She tore strips from one of her own petticoats, the finest linen she owned. His eyes fluttered open as she began to clean the wound. They were the color of dark, polished obsidian, and for a moment they were sharp and lucid, filled with a fierce, untamed pride. He flinched, a low growl rumbling in his chest. His hand shot out, grabbing her wrist with surprising strength. "Do not," he rasped, his voice a dry whisper of sound. Ilara's heart leaped into her throat, but she met his gaze. "It will fester," she said, her voice steady, despite her fear. "The bullet must come out. You will die if I do nothing." He stared at her, his eyes searching her face, looking for the trick, the treachery he surely expected. He saw none. He saw only a young woman with flour on her cheek and a determined set to her jaw. His grip loosened, and his hand fell away. His head slumped back onto the sacks, a silent consent. The next hour was an agonizing ordeal. Using a pair of her father's pliers, sterilized in the flame, she probed the wound. He never cried out, but his body went rigid and sweat beaded on his forehead. His fists clenched and unclenched, the only outward sign of the torment he was enduring. Finally, she felt the telltale scrape of metal on metal. With a final sickening pull, she extracted a flattened piece of lead. He let out a long, shuddering breath and passed out. Ilara worked through the night, a silent, focused spectre in the lamplight. She packed the cleaned wound with a poultice of yarrow to stop the bleeding and crushed calendula to fight the infection. She bound his side tightly with the linen strips. She brewed a strong tea of willow bark for the fever she knew was coming and managed to coax some of it between his lips. As dawn approached, painting the edges of the storm clouds in shades of lavender and grey, the immediate danger had passed. He was alive. But a new, more terrifying reality set in. She had an Apache warrior hidden in her shed. What was she going to do now? The answer was clear: nothing could stay in the shed. Her father would be out at first light to check the storm damage. She looked around frantically. Her eyes fell upon the trapdoor to the small, forgotten root cellar beneath the shed. It was barely used, a dark, damp space for storing potatoes and preserves. It was perfect. He was still unconscious, his fever making him pliant. It took all of her strength, but she managed to get the trapdoor open and half guide, half lower him into the darkness below. She set him down on a bed of old blankets, along with a jug of water and a bowl of the willow bark tea. As she closed the heavy wooden door over him, she felt a pang of guilt, as if she were burying him alive. The day was a blur of nerve-wracking tension. Her father Jedediah was in a foul mood, surveying the damage from the storm. A section of fence was indeed down, and a young calf had been lost to the flash flood. He barked orders at Ilara, his grief and frustration making him sharper than usual. Every slam of a door, every heavy footstep outside the shed sent a jolt of pure fear through her. Later that afternoon, a visitor arrived. Sheriff Brody Cain. Cain was a man who wore his authority like a well-oiled holster. He was handsome in a severe, predatory way, with cold blue eyes and a confidence that bordered on arrogance. He had made his interest in Ilara clear on more than one occasion, an interest she found deeply unsettling. He considered her quiet nature a sign of meekness, a quality he desired in a wife. "Jedediah," he said, his voice a smooth baritone as he dismounted his horse. "Heard you lost a calf. A damn shame." He tipped his hat to Ilara. "Miss Thompson, you look a little pale. The storm keeps you up." "Something like that, Sheriff," she mumbled, forcing a small smile and keeping her eyes on the ground. "We're still looking for that Chiricahua buck." Cain announced, his gaze sweeping the area. "The one who led the raid on the supply wagon. Tracked him this far before the storm washed everything out. He was gut-shot. Can't have gone far. Probably crawling in a ditch somewhere, dying like the animal he is." Ilara's blood ran cold. She could feel the heat of the lie she was living. The man he was describing was lying mere yards away beneath her feet. My deputy Finn found this near the riverbed. Cain continued pulling a small object from his saddlebag. It was a leather pouch, intricately beaded in the Apache style. "He's close." There's a $50 bounty on his head. That's good money for any man who finds him." Jedediah grunted. "If I see any sign, I'll let you know, Brody. You can count on that." Cain's eyes lingered on Ilara. "A pretty thing like you shouldn't have to worry about such matters. Redemption Creek needs to be made safe. That's my promise." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You let me know if you see anything out of the ordinary. Anything at all." He mounted his horse and rode off, leaving a cloud of dread in his wake. That night, Ilara waited until the house was dark and silent. Her father's heavy snores were a comforting rhythm in the oppressive quiet. She slipped out to the shed, her heart a frantic drum. She lifted the trap door. The cellar was pitch black. "Hello," she whispered. A rustle from the corner. Then a voice, stronger now, but still rough. "You are the settler's daughter. My name is Ilara." She lowered the lantern into space. He was sitting up, leaning against the damp earth wall. His obsidian eyes watched her, unblinking in the flickering light. He had drunk the water and some of the tea. Why, he asked, the single word hanging in the air between them. It wasn't a question of gratitude. It was a demand, an expression of profound suspicion. Why would she, a white woman, save him, an Apache? Ilara didn't have a simple answer. "You were dying," she said finally. "I am a healer. It is what I do." He considered this for a long moment. Your people would not call it healing. They would call it treason. He was right. She had no defense for that. She set down a small bowl of broth and a fresh bandage. "You need to eat, and I need to change the dressing." As she descended the ladder, he did not move away. He watched her every motion as she knelt and carefully unwrapped the bandage. The wound was clean, the angry redness already receding. Her poultice was working. As she worked, a strange intimacy filled the small, dark space. She was acutely aware of his presence, of the warmth of his skin, the scent of earth and fever that clung to him. "My name," he said, his voice low, "is Cole." She looked up, meeting his intense gaze. "Cole," she repeated. The name felt solid, real. It gave a face to the monster from the stories. "You have risked much for me, Ilara," he said, his eyes never leaving hers. "The man with the star, he will not stop looking. I know," she whispered. In the silence of the root cellar, surrounded by darkness, a fragile, dangerous trust was being forged. It was a secret, sealed not with words, but with a shared breath, a knowledge that their lives were now inextricably, terrifyingly linked. Days bled into a week. Life for Ilara settled into a perilous new routine, a life lived on two levels. Above ground, she was the dutiful daughter tending to chores, cooking meals and enduring her father's grim moods. She smiled at neighbors in the street, deflected questions from the gossiping Martha Jenkins about why she looked so tired, and avoided Sheriff Cain's lingering gazes. Below ground, in the damp, cool darkness of the root cellar, another life unfolded. Each night after her father was asleep, she would slip away to tend to Kyle. She brought him food-stolen scraps from their larder broth and hard bread. She brought him fresh water. Most importantly, she brought him healing. His wound was closing, the fever had broken, and the strength was slowly returning to his lean frame. And they talked. At first, their conversations were brief and practical, but as the nights passed, the walls of suspicion began to crumble, replaced by a tentative curiosity. He told her his name, Kyle, was what she could call him. His Apache name was for his people. He spoke of the Chiricahua Mountains, not as a wilderness to be tamed, but as a living entity, a mother that provided all. He described a world so different from her own, a world of spirits in the wind and stories in the stars. He was a keen observer, asking her questions in turn. He learned of her mother's love for plants, and a flicker of understanding crossed his face. She had the gift, he said one night, his voice resonating in the small space. She listened to the land. Elara felt a lump form in her throat. My father says it was foolishness. Your father fears what he does not understand. Kyle replied, his insight so sharp it startled her. It is the settler's way. To fear and then to destroy. He taught her things. He showed her how the smallest change in the cricket's chirp could signal a change in weather. He explained which roots ones she had overlooked could be ground to make a paste that soothed burns. He spoke not in lectures, but in quiet, simple truths. In his presence, the world she knew began to feel small and colorless. A strange and powerful connection grew between them in that subterranean world. It was a bond forged in secrecy and vulnerability. She would watch the way the lantern light carved shadows across his strong features, the intensity in his dark eyes, the surprising gentleness in his hands as he showed her how to properly tie a knot. He, in turn, watched her with an unnerving focus, as if he were memorizing every detail of her face. But above ground, the whispers were starting. Elara May seems distracted lately. Martha Jenkins commented to a group of women outside the general store, just loud enough for Elara to overhear. And thin. It's not right for a young woman to be so preoccupied. Sheriff Cain's visits became more frequent. He would stop by the homestead under the pretense of sharing news, but his eyes would follow Elara, probing, questioning. Still no sign of our Apache, he said one afternoon, leaning against a fence post, while Elara weeded the small vegetable garden. It's like he vanished into thin air. Unless, of course, someone helped him vanish. Elara's hands still. She kept her face hidden beneath her sunbonnet. Who would do such a thing, Sheriff? He's an enemy. You'd be surprised, Cain said, his voice dangerously soft. Sometimes people with soft hearts do stupid things. They mistake a rabid wolf for a lost puppy. He paused. I've been asking around about that raid. The driver who survived. He said the Apache wasn't trying to steal the whole wagon. Just one small crate, a crate of personal effects being sent to me from my late wife's family back east. Elara felt a chill despite the afternoon sun. The official story was changing. What was in it, she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Mementos, heirlooms, things of no value to a savage. But he took them. And he killed 2 good men to do it. That's why this is personal, Elara. I won't rest until I see him hang. That night, she confronted Kyle with the story. She expected anger, denial. Instead, his face became a stoic mask. The raid, she pressed her voice, urgent. Sheriff Cain said you killed 2 men for a box of his wife's things. Kyle was silent for a long time. He traced a pattern in the dirt floor of the cellar. The Inder white men on the wagon shot first. He said, finally, his voice flat. My 2 cousins were with me. They were killed. We were not raiding. We were hunting. The wagon drivers saw us and opened fire. We fought back. Men died on both sides. It is the way of this war. But the crate Elara insisted. Why take it? He looked at her, his eyes clouded with a memory he was not ready to share. There are stories you believe because you are told them, he said. And there are truths you see with your own eyes. The sheriff's story is for his people. It is not the truth. His evasion frustrated her, but she saw the deep pain in his eyes. She didn't push further. But the sheriff's words had planted a seed of doubt. The world was not as simple as she had believed. The lines between good and evil, savage and civilized, were blurring into an incomprehensible grey. Her father, too, was growing more suspicious. He noticed the missing food, the linen torn for bandages, the way she would startle at the slightest sound. He saw the new depth in her eyes, a shadow he didn't recognize. One evening, as she was preparing to slip out, he blocked her path. "Where do you go every night, Elara?" he demanded, his voice low and hard. "The chores are done. There's nowhere to be. Just getting some air, Pa," she stammered. "In the dark, with the coyotes." "Don't lie to me, girl." He grabbed her arm, his grip like iron. "I am your father. You will tell me what secret you are keeping in this house." Panic clawed at her throat. The lie she had been living was about to unravel. Before she could answer, the sound of hoofbeats thundered into their yard. It was Sheriff Cain and his deputy Finn. They were not here for a social call. Their faces were grim and they carried rifles. Jedediah Cain's voice boomed. "We got a tip. An old prospector up in the hills. Said he saw a fire near your property the night of the storm before the rain washed everything out. Said it wasn't your chimney." Cain's cold blue eyes locked onto Elara's. "We're searching every barn, every shed, every outbuilding from here to the river. Starting with yours." Elara's world tilted on its axis. Her father's suspicious gaze intensified, connecting the dots of her strange behavior with the sheriff's sudden arrival. There was no escape. They were walking toward the shed, toward the trap door, toward the man hidden beneath it. The world shrank to the space between the cabin and the shed. Each of Sheriff Cain's heavy bootfalls was a hammer blow against Elara's heart. Her father Jedediah stood beside her, his face a thunderous mask of confusion and dawning suspicion. He looked from Cain's determined face to his daughter's pale, terrified one, and a terrible understanding began to form in his eyes. "What's in the shed?" Elara Jedediah's voice was a low growl meant for her alone. She couldn't answer. Her tongue felt thick, useless. All she could think of was Cale trapped and still not fully healed in the darkness below. Just herbs and tools, Pa. She finally managed to choke out the lie, tasting like ash in her mouth. Cain reached the shed door. "Finn, check the barn. I'll take this one." He gave Elara a look that was both triumphant and possessive. "Don't you worry, Miss Thompson. We'll root out any vermin hiding on your land." He pushed the door open and stepped inside. Elara's breath caught in her throat. The interior was dimly lit by the fading daylight, filtering through the single dirty window. It looked exactly as it always did, bundles of dried herbs hanging from the rafters, tools neatly arranged on a workbench, sacks of feed stacked against the wall. And in the center of the floor, the large, flat trap door to the root cellar, covered by a dusty burlap sack. Cain's eyes swept the room. He kicked at a pile of hay, prodded a barrel with the tip of his rifle. Elara held her breath, praying he would overlook the door. Praying for a miracle. He stopped, his gaze settling on the floor. He slowly walked to the center of the room and nudged the burlap sack with his boot. The corner of the trapdoor's iron ring was exposed. "Well now," Cain said softly, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "What do we have here?" "Jedediah." "A root cellar I don't recall you mentioning." Jedediah's face went white. He turned on Elara, his eyes blazing with a mixture of fury and betrayal. "Girl, what have you done? Step aside, both of you," Cain commanded, his voice hardening. He holstered his pistol and bent down, grabbing the iron ring. This was it. The end. Elara's mind raced, searching for a desperate last-ditch plan. There was none. In a few seconds, Cain would throw open the door, and Kyle would be revealed. He would be shot where he lay, or worse, dragged out to be hanged. And she would be branded a traitor, an outcast, her life in Redemption Creek over forever. Just as Cain began to pull, a sudden piercing shriek split the air from the direction of the house. It was a sound of pure terror. Everyone frozen. "What in God's name was that?" Jedediah exclaimed. They turned to see Martha Jenkins, their busybody neighbour, standing on her porch, pointing wildly toward the hills behind the Thompson homestead. "Snake!" she screamed, her voice shrill with panic. "A big one went right into my chicken coop. It'll get all my hens." Cain straightened up his hand, falling from the ring. He swore under his breath, his frustration palpable. A rampaging Apache was one thing. A hysterical woman losing her prize-winning hens was a more immediate and public problem. "Finn," he bellowed, "get over here." Deputy Finn came running from the barn. He was a young man, barely older than Ilara, with an earnest face that usually seemed out of place under the brim of his hat. "Ma'am, calm down," Finn said, trying to soothe the frantic woman. "I will not calm down," she shrieked. "That was a diamondback 4 feet long. If it was an inch, Sheriff, you have to do something." Cain shot a look of pure venom at the trap door, then at Ilara. He was being pulled away from his prize, and he knew it. But the public duty of a sheriff in a small town was undeniable. He had to act. "Damn it," he muttered. "All right. Jedediah, you stay here. Keep an eye on things." His gaze locked with Ilara's. "I'm not done here. We'll be back." With a final frustrated glance, he and Finn strode over to Mrs. Jenkins's property to deal with the snake. Ilara's knees felt weak with relief. It was a reprieve, a miracle born of a terrified neighbor and a common reptile. But she knew it was temporary. The net had been thrown, and it was only a matter of time before it was drawn tight again. As soon as the sheriff was out of earshot, Jedediah turned on her. His face was a terrifying sight. The fear and suspicion had coalesced into a cold, hard rage. "You will tell me what is under that floor, Ilara," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You will tell me now." There was no more room for lies. Tears streamed down her face as the confession tumbled out, a jumbled, whispered story of the storm, the wound, the healing. She told him everything, her voice cracking with fear and exhaustion. Jedediah listened without interruption, his expression unreadable, his face carved from stone. When she finished, the silence was heavier than any shout. He stared at the trap door, then back at his daughter, the only family he had left. He looked at her as if she were a stranger. "My own flesh and blood," he whispered, the words filled with a pain so deep it seemed to physically wound him, betraying her own kind. For one of them. He didn't yell. He didn't raise a hand to her. He did something far worse. He turned his back on her, a gesture of complete and utter condemnation, and walked slowly, stiffly back to the house. The door shut behind him with a sound of chilling finality. Ilara was left alone in the shed, standing over the trap door. She had been saved from the sheriff only to be condemned by her own father. She felt a profound and desolate loneliness wash over her. She had made her choice, and in doing so, she had severed the last tie that bound her to this life. Later that night, long after the sheriff had dispatched the snake and the town had settled, she lifted the trap door. The lantern cast long dancing shadows on the cellar walls. Kyle was standing waiting for her. He had heard everything. "Your father," he began, his voice laced with concern. "He knows," she said, her voice hollow. "He won't help me. But I don't think he will help the sheriff either. He is a hard man, but he is my father." It was a hope more than a certainty. Kyle took a step closer. His wounds were healing, but she could see a new kind of pain in his eyes. Pain for her. He reached out his hand, hesitating for a moment, before he gently brushed a stray tear from her cheek with his thumb. The touch was electric, a spark of warmth in the cold dread that surrounded her. "You should not have done this for me," he said softly. "You have lost everything." "I haven't lost my soul," she whispered, looking up at him. "And I would be just as lost if I had let you die." In that moment, a profound shift occurred between them. He was no longer just a man she was healing, and she was no longer just his savior. They were two people, adrift in a hostile world, with only each other to cling to. The sheriff spoke of a crate, she said, needing to understand. He spoke of his wife's mementos. "Kyle, you must tell me the truth." Kyle's expression hardened. He reached into a small leather pouch at his belt, one she hadn't noticed before. He pulled out a small silver object and pressed it into her hand. It was a locket tarnished with age, intricately engraved with the image of a soaring hawk. It felt strangely familiar in her palm. "This was in the crate," he said, his voice tight with emotion. "It does not belong to the sheriff's wife. It belonged to mine." The words hit her with the force of a physical blow. She was killed a year ago, not by settlers, by a sickness that swept through our camp. But this was stolen from her grave by prospectors. I tracked them for months. They sold it. The trail led me to that wagon. I was not there to raid. I was there to reclaim the only piece of her I have left. Elara stared at the locket, her heart aching for him, for a past she couldn't have imagined. She opened it. Inside there was no miniature portrait. Instead, on one side was a tiny pressed desert marigold, and on the other, a small intricate symbol she didn't recognize. "The sheriff is lying," she said, her mind reeling. "He is building a story to make you a monster." "He has a reason," Kyle said grimly. "He wants me dead, and he wants this land, all of it." He looked at her, his dark eyes burning with an intensity that took her breath away. "He will come back, Elara. Not just for me. For you." The temporary relief she had felt was gone, replaced by the chilling certainty of Cain's obsession. He wasn't just a lawman hunting a fugitive. This was a vendetta, and she was now standing in the middle of it. The next day dawned with an oppressive silence. Jedediah did not speak to Elara. He moved about the homestead like a ghost, his face set in grim, unforgiving lines. He repaired the fence, tended the livestock, his movements stiff with unspoken rage. Elara's attempts at conversation were met with a wall of silence that was more damning than any tirade. He was treating her as if she no longer existed. The strain was unbearable. That evening, as Jedediah sat at the small kitchen table, cleaning his rifle with meticulous, angry strokes, Elara knew she could not endure the silence any longer. "Pa!" she began, her voice trembling. "Please, talk to me." He didn't look up. The only sound was the metallic rasp of the cleaning rod sliding down the barrel. "You have to understand," she pleaded, tears welling in her eyes. "He would have died. I couldn't. Jedediah finally stopped his work. He slowly raised his head, and the look in his eyes made her flinch. It was a raw, bottomless grief. "You speak of understanding," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "You who brought a wolf into my house, the same kind of animal that puts men like me in the ground. Your mother, God rest her soul. She would be heartbroken." "No." Elara cried, the accusation striking her to the core. Mother would have understood. She was the one who taught me to see people, not just labels. She saw the good in... She was a fool. Jedediah roared, slamming his fist on the table, the rifle clattering against the wood. A kind, gentle, trusting fool. And her foolishness is what killed her. Elara stared at him, stunned into silence. "What are you talking about? Mother died of consumption." Jedediah's face crumpled. The anger seemed to drain out of him, leaving behind a man hollowed out by a long-held sorrow. "That's the story I told," he whispered, his gaze distant. "The story was easier. The truth is something I buried with her." He pushed himself away from the table and walked to a small locked chest in the corner, the one that held her mother's few possessions. With a trembling hand, he unlocked it and took out a small leather-bound journal. He handed it to Ilara. "Your mother wasn't just a healer," he said, his voice thick with unshed tears. "She was a friend. To them, the Apache." Ilara opened the journal. Her mother's delicate script filled the pages. It told a story that Ilara had never known. Years ago, when they first settled this land, her mother Sarah had found a young Apache woman near the creek, delirious with fever. Just as Ilara had done, Sarah had secretly nursed the woman back to health. A friendship had formed. They had met in secret, exchanging knowledge, Sarah teaching her English, the Apache woman whose name was Neil, teaching her about the healing plants of the desert. Neil's husband was a great warrior. Jedediah continued his voice, barely audible. "They brought us gifts, venison when our own stores were low. They warned us of a rock slide that would have destroyed our first cabin. They were our friends." Ilara's eyes scanned the pages, her heart pounding. Her mother wrote of this friendship with love and wonder. Then the tone of the entries changed, becoming fearful. Settler expansion was increasing. Men like Sheriff Cain's predecessor were stirring up hatred. Neil had warned her it was no longer safe. The last entry was short, the handwriting shaky. "Jedediah says we must stop. He is afraid. He does not understand that fear is the poison that will kill us all. Neil gave me a gift today, a locket, a symbol of the bond between our families. She says it is a promise of peace. I will keep it always." Ilara looked up from the journal, her mind reeling. The locket. After she died, Jedediah said, his voice breaking, "I found it. I was so angry at them for bringing this danger into our lives, at her for her trust. I rode out to the bluffs, shouting her name, cursing them. I threw it as far as I could into the canyon. I wanted to erase that part of her, to protect you from her foolishness." He sank back into his chair, a broken man. "I was the fool. I let fear rule me. I buried her truth, and in doing so, I buried the best part of her." At that moment, the back door creaked open. Both Ilara and Jedediah turned, their blood running cold. Kyle stood in the doorway. He was no longer the wounded man from the cellar. He stood tall, his presence filling the small cabin. He had heard everything. His eyes were fixed on Jedediah, not with menace, but with a profound, sorrowful understanding. Jedediah scrambled for his rifle, but his movements were clumsy, panicked. Nopa Ilara cried, stepping between them. "My wife's name was Neil Kyle," said his voice, low and steady, resonating with a power that stopped Jedediah cold. He looked from the journal in Ilara's hand to the haunted face of her father. "Your wife." "Sarah." "She was a woman of great honor. My wife spoke of her often." The rifle in Jedediah's hands lowered. The monster from his nightmares was standing in his kitchen, speaking of his dead wife with reverence. The world he had built, the hatred he had nurtured for years, was crumbling around him. Kyle then turned his gaze to Ilara. He saw the journal, the tears on her face, the defiant way she stood between him and her father. He saw the woman who had risked everything, not just to save his life, but because it was in her nature to heal, to mend what was broken. He saw her mother's spirit living within her. He stepped forward, his eyes never leaving hers. The air in the room was thick with unspoken emotions. "Ilara May Thompson." He said, his voice, now soft, yet carrying an unshakable conviction. He took the silver locket from his pouch. It was the same one. The one Jedediah had thrown away, in anger. The one Kyle had reclaimed, thinking it was his wife's, a different one given to her by her own mother. Now, seeing the journal, he understood. It was a symbol passed between their families. Your mother and my wife dreamed of a world where our people did not have to be enemies, he said. They were wiser than all the warriors and politicians. In you I see that same wisdom, that same courage. He took her hand, his calloused palm warm and strong around hers. This war will not last forever. The world is changing, but my path is no longer the one I walked before. You have changed it. His dark eyes held hers, and in their depths she saw not just gratitude, but a future. When this is over, when the sheriff is dealt with, and the truth is known, I will not return to the mountains alone. I swear on the spirits of my ancestors and the memory of your mother. A life with you is all I seek. I promise you, a life together under an open sky, where we are judged not by the color of our skin, but by the truth in our hearts. It was a vow, a warrior's sacred promise made in a humble settler's cabin. It was an impossible dream, uttered in the face of a world determined to tear them apart. For Jedediah, it was the sound of his carefully constructed world shattering into 1,000,000 pieces. For Ilara, amidst the fear and the turmoil, it was the most beautiful sound she had ever heard. Cael's vow settled in the small cabin, a sacred promise in a world that had shown them little mercy. The words transformed Jedediah Thompson. The sight of the Apache warrior holding his daughter's hand, speaking of a shared future, shattered the last of his hardened prejudice. He saw not a savage, but a man of honor, and in that moment of clarity, he saw the depth of his own failings. The choice was made. You cannot stay. Jedediah said, his voice firm. He was finally looking at Cael as a man. Cain will be back. His obsession? It's more than just a personal vendetta. He wants this land, Cael explained, his voice low and urgent. He held up the silver locket. The symbol inside marks an old treaty line. It is proof that this entire settlement is built on stolen Apache land. Cain's family were the original surveyors who falsified the maps. This locket proves their fraud. He isn't hunting a killer. He's trying to bury the truth by burying me. The entire twisted puzzle snapped into place. Cain's crusade was a desperate cover for a massive lie. He will kill you both to keep that secret, Jedediah stated grimly. We have to get you away. Tonight. A desperate plan was formed in whispered haste. With Cael now strong enough to ride, he and Ilara would take Jedediah's best horse and a pack mule, heading east toward the sanctuary of the Chiricahua Mountains, under the cover of the new moon. As Ilara gathered her medicines and her mother's journal, her father approached his face, etched with a lifetime of regret. I was wrong, Ilara, he said, his voice choked with emotion. Your mother had a strength I mistook for weakness. You are her daughter. Go with him. Find a life where you don't have to live in the shadows of other people's hate. He pressed a small, heavy pouch of coins into her hand. That's all I have. The poignant moment was shattered by the sound of hoofbeats thundering toward the homestead. Cael peered through the window. Riders, he said, his voice tense. The sheriff. There was no time to run. The seller Jedediah commanded, his mind racing. Both of you get in. I'll handle this. He'll search the house, Pa Ilara cried. Let him, Jedediah said, grabbing his rifle, his eyes hardening with a resolve she had never seen. He won't find you. He rushed them into the shed and down into the root cellar, pulling the heavy trap door shut. They heard him dragging heavy sacks of grain over the door, concealing their hiding place, just moments before Sheriff Cain and Deputy Finn arrived. Jedediah. We know he's here. Cain's voice boomed sharp with malice. Evening, Sheriff, Jedediah's voice replied, unnervingly calm. Cut the act, old man. We saw a light in the shed. Where are they? In the darkness, Ilara held her breath, Kyle's hand a steadying presence on her shoulder. My daughter is gone. Jedediah lied, his voice ringing with conviction. Packed her things and left for Prescott. Couldn't stand my grim company any longer. Cain's skeptical laugh was chilling. You're a terrible liar, Jedediah. There was the sound of a scuffle, a grunt of pain from her father. Finn, search the house, I'll take the shed. Heavy footsteps echoed directly above them. Cain was in the shed, kicking things over, his rage palpable. He's here somewhere, he roared in frustration. Finn, get in here and help me move this damn grain. This was it. They were trapped. Kyle drew his knife, ready for a final, hopeless fight. But as Finn's footsteps entered the shed, his voice came hesitant, but clear. Sheriff, maybe they're gone. They are not gone, Cain snapped. Now help me. A long, tense pause followed. No, Finn said, his voice shaking but resolute. What did you say to me? Deputy Cain's voice was a venomous whisper. I said no. Finn repeated, his voice gaining strength. I've been watching you. This isn't about justice. It's about your greed and your obsession with Ilara. I've heard the rumors about the land treaty. I won't be a part of your crimes. You little traitor, Cain spat. A single sharp crack of a pistol split the night. A gasp followed by the heavy thud of a body hitting the floorboards right above their heads. Cale threw his strength against the trap door. It shifted under the grain sacks, and with a final shove it flew open. They scrambled out into a scene of chaos. Jedediah was on the ground, nursing a bleeding head wound, but alive. Sheriff Brody Cain lay dead on the floor, a smoking hole in his chest. And standing over him, pistol trembling in his hand, was Deputy Finn. He drew on me, Finn whispered, his face pale with shock. He was going to kill me. I had no choice. The reckoning had come not in a grand battle, but in a sudden, violent act of conscience. Cain's reign of terror was over. In the tense quiet that followed, Deputy Finn, now the sole representative of the law, made his decision. I'll report that I shot Cain in self-defense after discovering his corruption, he declared, his voice steadying. He was a tyrant. The town will believe it. The official story will be that the Apache warrior vanished weeks ago. He looked at Kyle and Ilara, a new authority in his gaze. You need to be gone before sunrise. The farewell was a hurried, tearful embrace between father and daughter. Live free, Ilara, Jedediah whispered, holding her tight. That's all a father can ask. He gave Kyle a single sharp nod, a gesture of trust, a father's blessing. Ilara and Kyle slipped away into the pre-dawn darkness, leaving behind the only life she had ever known. They rode east, two solitary figures against a vast landscape, heading toward a future that was both a promise and a mystery. Their journey was a crucible that burned away their old identities. The harsh, beautiful land became their teacher. Cale showed Ilara how to read the earth, to find water and food, and to move in harmony with the wild. She in turn read to him from her mother's journal, by the light of their nightly campfires, their families' histories of peace and sorrow, weaving together into a single resilient story. The settler's daughter and the Apache warrior disappeared, and in their place were simply Ilara and Cale, their bond deepening with every mile traveled, every hardship shared. Weeks later, they reached the soaring peaks of the Chiricahua Mountains. Kyle's people, the remnants of a proud tribe scarred by war, greeted them with suspicion. An outsider, a white woman, was a threat. But they saw the honor in which Kyle held her, and they witnessed her quiet strength and healing hands. When Kyle presented the locket and told the story of her mother's friendship with Neol, a bridge of understanding began to form. Ilara was not an enemy. She was the fulfillment of an old dream of peace. Their new life was not one of ease, but it was one of meaning. They built a home in a hidden valley by a stream that sang with the music of the mountains. He taught her the Chiricahua language and lore. She taught him to read the words in her books. Their love, born in a dark cellar and forged on a desperate journey, blossomed in the open air of freedom. The promise Kyle had made in that dusty cabin, a life together under an open sky, was no longer a distant hope. It was their reality every single day. Their story would never be recorded in the annals of the West, but it lived on a quiet legend whispered on the mountain wind, a timeless testament to a love that had risked everything to build a new horizon. The story of Ilara and Cale is a powerful reminder that the bravest frontiers are not on any map. They lie within the human heart. Theirs was a love that should have been impossible, a bond forged in the fires of conflict and sealed with a promise of a shared future. They dared to see the humanity in each other when the world demanded they see only an enemy. They chose courage over comfort and truth over tradition. In a wild and unforgiving land, they found their own kind of paradise, not in a place, but in each other. If their story of impossible love and incredible courage moved you, please help us keep these tales of the Old West alive. Hit that like button to show your support. Share this video with a friend who appreciates a powerful story, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more true-to-life dramas from the American frontier. Don't forget to ring that notification bell so you never miss a new chapter. Thank you for listening.